Welcome to ADI TV. The crop tool is a tool that allows you to crop images in various different ways. So if we have a look, there's actually several different types that are associated with this. I'm actually going to talk about the crop tool and the perspective tool. The slice tool is primarily aimed for people doing web design or some sort of maybe program design when they need to slice up images. So I'm not going to cover those because that's almost a specialist use. Looking at the crop tool, if I select that, what happens first of all is that it has this grid over the image. Now, as you see, as my cursor moves over these boxes in the corners, the cursor actually changes and allows me to maneuver this grid over the image. Now, what you're seeing here is the dark patches on the outside is the stuff that's going to be deleted or removed. Stuff that's still highlighted with the grid over it is actually going to be kept, and you're free to move this around to get just the right part of the image you want. So if I wanted just the flag, didn't want really too much of the foreground, just the bridge tower, then I can get like that pretty close. Now when I'm happy with that, what I do with this tool is I just double click and that automatically crops that image. The way I've done it here is actually removed or deleted the picture. Now if I just go back to my move tool, and that's got rid of the crop, and we notice the background, this is a background layer. Now with the background layer I can't actually move this at all. We are looking at 100% of everything that's there, and I can demonstrate that if I change the layer to 0, to a layer 0, and actually move the image. You can see that the image is actually the same size as the canvas. So if I move the image, we reveal the canvas. Now sometimes when you crop, you want to crop the image but you don't want to actually delete the pixels, so that maybe you can adjust it later. So if I go back via my history to open, go back to my crop, and just for argument's sake, let's just move this down. Just to demonstrate, it doesn't have to be too accurate. Okay, so that's roughly what I had last time. Now up here on the contextual menu, I have this box that says delete cropped pixels. If I uncheck that this time, what that does is that now if I double click on the image, there you go, okay, so it's cropped it. But if you'll notice that in the layers, it's actually changed the layer type to a layer 0. That means if I go back to my move tool, if I move this image down, last time we couldn't see the stuff that I deleted. Now this time you can see that it's actually still there. So it's kind of like a non-destructive edit. It's cropped the canvas size but not the actual image. And that's really useful if you want to go back and tweak it, or maybe that you've got some client that is quite fussy. And it's probably a way I would recommend you crop, because then it allows you to go back and change it another date. Okay, some other things, if I go back to my crop tool and go back to open image, we've got some different options up here in the contextual menu. Now right now we're cropping the image at the aspect ratio that it's come in as. But if we wanted to crop it, let's say for like a TV image, like HD 16:9, if I click on 16:9, automatically my crop box gives me a 16:9 aspect ratio crop box. Now as we can see, the image that I've got is actually portrait, and 16:9 is obviously landscape. But this is really useful if you definitely need something to be a particular aspect ratio, and you're free to change that, and the same things apply. You can also make your own by changing these boxes, these two boxes here, one being width, one being height. Okay, so let me go back to full one. Okay, don't crop. Back to the crop tool. Okay, there's also some other options. If we click on this grid icon, we actually can get up different types of grids. So if you happen to be inspired by the golden section, you can then crop the image with that in mind. Now you'll notice that as I'm cropping, I'm free to move this crop box left or right. Now if I wanted it to maintain the aspect ratio, if I hold down shift, see that actually keeps the aspect ratio. So I'm holding shift down now. If I hold down option and shift, it basically crops from the center, or it scales from the center of the crop box. Now that's the same as the marquee tool or any of the other tools. Shift generally constrains proportions, and Alt generally makes it do whatever it's doing from the middle, from the center, rather than the opposite point. Okay, so you're free to kind of play around with these options. I want to go back to rule of thirds. In this in this box here, we've got some more sort of preferences type thing. We can use the classic mode. So if you're familiar with CS or, you know, right the way up to CS5, you can use the classic mode. This new mode that I've just been demonstrating is actually for the newer versions of CS Suite. And you've got some other different options. You can change the opacity of the background. You can see that sometimes it's, you know, you want to see a more definite version of what you're going to get, and you can mess around with those as you will. Now, there's another thing which I found was quite useful. If I could just go back to let's double click on that. Okay, and go back to open. Now, there's a way to basically straighten what you're cropping. Now, there's numerous ways of doing this, and this isn't necessarily the best way of doing it, but I'll demonstrate it while it's here. So let's say I wanted this pillar of this bridge to be actually perfectly straight. So instead of cropping, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that straighten button and draw a line horizontally, in this case vertically, sorry, of where an object which I want to be vertical. So we want this pillar to be vertical, so I'm going to draw this line vertically along it. Now, as you can see, now I've done that, it's actually aligned that pillar, so it's actually, you know, bulk upright, and it's actually moved in the crop marks so that I don't get any checkered background. So it's scaled the image intelligently to give me the maximum image size I can get that's square and you know, not at an angle, and the pillar's straight. So that can be really useful sometimes, and that saves a few steps if you're cropping and changing the angle of something at the same time. Okay, next up, I wanted to talk about the perspective tool. So the perspective tool I don't tend to use that much, but it can be quite useful. Now if I wanted to change the perspective of this image, or even add perspective to an image, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw over this image, like so. And then it enables me to kind of manipulate the perspective. So the grid represents what's going to happen. So if I double click on that now, you can see that it's kind of, it's almost, you know, it's changed the perspective of where I took the image from. So it's making it look as if I'm more flat on to the image. This is kind of a little trick that, you know, in small amounts can work really well. I think if you try and use it to like extreme, it starts to look like you've changed the perspective. It doesn't look quite real, but it's something you can play around with. And while we're demonstrating these things, I'll show you how it works. You obviously, if you had something that was flat and you wanted to give it perspective, you could do that at the same time as well, instead of going the other way. Okay, and that brings us to the end of those. The School of Arts and Digital Industries at the University of East London.